This is episode 10 of the Stick to F1 podcast. Anthony Mingioni, Jason Myrtetus. No Grand Prix to preview this weekend. We're in the summer break. The driver standings are tight. The constructors are tight. There's a lot of storylines. It's silly season. Who's going to be jumping from seat to seat? We're going to talk about that and much more as we now count down the days to Spa and the Belgian Grand Prix. And I'm not ready for the break. I'm really not. This is kind of a slow time for hockey. Everybody kind of, all the front offices kind of, detach and go to the cottages or take their time away. Nothing's really going to happen. It's a time when I really wish I had some fresh F1 to deal with.
Yeah, August is, as they like to say, is everything's on holiday, for everything.
Indeed.
Here. And everybody is, and we saw some of the pictures flowing in from I think I saw there was an RT. I think Pierre Gasly was in Ibiza, as they like to say, with I believe it was Stoffel Van Dorn. So they're all out doing the young guys were all out doing their adventuring and things of that sort. And yeah, we're here doing an F1 podcast, and there's no race, and I don't mind. I'm okay with like a 1 week break, but when we go like 3 weeks, it's tough. I'd love, and
literally 28 days between Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's a long time, and I get it. This is it, but I get it from the driver's perspective. I do get it from and it happens in other sports. Like we see it in soccer as well, and where there's a break in between. But it still doesn't lack for storylines going through. It does give me a chance when I'm looking at racing to maybe look at some of the other racing going on right now. Poke in a little bit on Formula E too on occasion here.
Yeah.
On IndyCar as well to see where things are at. But yeah, my first thing is Formula One, so it's definitely tough.
The other thing too, what we have to realize with this break, we have to be cognizant of this, is that they're traveling all over the globe. They're not going from, Boston to race to Miami to Chicago. They're going country to country, Bahrain to Imola to all over the world. I mean, you're just jumping. You're not jumping state to state here. It's a lot more difficult on the body and time changes and everything else. We see it early in the morning here in the United States.
Yeah. For
the most part, 9 o'clock races or 10 o'clock races. Free practice one is usually 5 a.m. or 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Which I've actually gotten up and watched a few times, which is kind of sad, but it's a good time though.
No, it's not. You're a dedicated you love Formula One, so you're willing to get up at 5 a.m. to watch it.
Well, one of the guys, Matt Gallagher from W2F1 podcast, tweeted out, "We got the month off long break. What do we do?" And I responded with a screenshot of the top 20 races since 2010, and this is it's actually the top 100 that I have off this website ranked. And I just click through those and watch old races. And I watch about 5 or 6 a week. Usually I'll watch them late night, and I may not get to the checkered flag, but I'll go back and finish it on my F1 TV app. So you can get your fix that way. Let me ask you this, though. Through 11 races, it's not the midpoint, but close enough.
Just about.
What's the number one storyline so far for you?
For me, it obviously remains the war on and off the track between Red Bull and Mercedes. I mean, there's just, it's enthralling every single week. I think it's, it triggers passions, I think, in Formula One fans on both sides who
much meat on the bone, like
there
storylines and villains and Toto Wolff trying to apologize to it was hilarious. Goes to the team boss of Red Bull after the race, and Christian Horner doesn't accept his apology.
That's Christian, though. I mean, it's his personality. For anybody who knows anything about Christian, it's just this is it's a cutthroat business on all sides. I mean, remember watching Drive to Survive season 3, and Toto kind of says Christian likes his war games, and they all do.
Yeah, so
that's all. But they all do. I mean, this is also Toto's "let's crush them." The idea of going up the field. So this is to be expected. You would like there to be a little bit more sportsmanship, but it also Christian does have a bit of a, he's impassioned and
Competitive.
feels a certain way. I think also maybe if it's on camera, sometimes I think he was, because I think Toto was, and this is my opinion, I think Toto was well aware that the cameras were rolling when he went up to him to try to shake Christian's hand. It was sort of in that moment, and they feel a certain kind of way right now. They have a lead that's been evaporated through circumstances that are mostly out of Red Bull's control, and
it's a crashing them.
The Mercs basically, one was a direct crash, and the second one was a bowling ball effect.
Yeah,
in Hungary, and I completely get and understand Horner's perspective of these circumstances and how that frustrates, because you also are looking at grid penalties now because of the fact that Sergio Perez's car, the engine is likely to have to be replaced, so they're looking at a penalty, a 5-grid penalty at a certain point.
And Sergio's going to end up with a penalty this season because of having to change that engine out too.
Right, exactly, and therein lies. That's one of the things where I think a lot of the racers right now were extremely frustrated with Valtteri, who I think normally in most circumstances everybody's kind of, mistakes happen, but when you have that many things happening at once in one moment, and it's a miscalculation on the driver's part. And again, I think Valtteri was also reacting to the fact that Lando got a jump on him unexpectedly. He did have wheel spin at the beginning, and we all saw, as we discussed at the end of the Hungarian race, he misjudged the braking zone. And I think based off the data, it looks like he did slightly get back when they were approaching turn one.
Throttle.
He did slightly throttle before trying to hit the brake, and then he went right into the back of him.
Yeah, I watched the Julian Palmer's analysis on it. It was fascinating because he kind of gets pincered. He gets squeezed off because he doesn't get off the line well by both Norris on his right and then Perez on his left.
Mm-hmm.
And then so he gets out of the throttle. But, Julian made a great point. They don't know. They have no idea where the braking zone is because they haven't practiced or anything in the wet in those conditions, and they're on inters, and you have just no idea where to brake. And if you're cautious, you got a guy coming up your rear. If you're aggressive, you're going up somebody else's rear. And he took all those guys. I mean, he put his arms up. He knows it was his fault, but it was a frustrating one. I think my biggest storyline, outside of what you just brought up, and that's obviously the biggest thing, but inside that storyline, the biggest thing for me, Ann, is that when bad luck has stricken Red Bull, they have paid a very sharp price for it.
Yes.
And when bad luck has struck Lewis Hamilton in particular, he has not paid the price. Go back to go to Bahrain.
Yeah.
Max has the faster car. He passes Lewis, but he violates a track violation, where Lewis was taking advantage of that the entire race, and staying inside the track limits.
Yeah.
And Max passes him there in that same turn and has to give the place back. Can't get around him. That's a big penalty.
It is circumstance in this case, and Lewis if there's such a thing as 9 lives for drivers, Lewis has used quite a few of them
already
this season. He has used quite a few of them already. Imola's the biggest. Yeah, to me, Imola's probably Imola and Silverstone. Him, because there was a real good chance that car could have been retired had he not gotten that red flag. The damage on it was enough at the point where they said legitimately both of those guys could have been retired.
Yeah, the only time the F1 sports gods really played a part here is at Baku.
Yes, exactly. When Lewis the brake brake magic completely failed, and he goes straight off because he had the jump. Because we all know Baku, he had the jump. He had the jump on Perez on the restart, and it just and then he locks and goes straight off. And that's the one time here where, but again, it's just, and that's ultimately it's kind of kept things close. And that Baku race was such a roller coaster. Probably this one, the most recent race, is probably the most recent close to a roller coaster, but a little bit longer in the circumstance where it was something unexpected happened.
Baku, Max is dominating that race, and Sergio's doing a great job holding off Lewis, and then we know what happened. 2 tire failures in that race for Max, and then Stroll a little bit earlier than that. And we see how that affected, the standings as well. And then, Imola, Lewis tries to go around the outside on a damn track, and he doesn't. He goes in, and then he puts the nose of the car into the wall, but has the wherewithal to back out, not spin his tires, and then Valtteri crashes, and he ends up finishing P2 in that race. If that Valtteri and Russell don't come together there, then he maybe doesn't score any points. It's amazing. Like that's where the luck comes in, and you can create a lot of luck by being in the right spot.
Yep.
But sometimes you just need luck for luck's sake, and Lewis has gotten a little bit of it, and of late Max has not. I mean, he gets collected at Hungary, which is crazy. That there's a little bit of blame for both guys. I think more so Lewis with what happened at Silverstone, at Copse, but and Lewis ends up getting points out of that too, and it's amazing. And Lewis made 2 other passes in Copse that race as well. So
he did, and was success.
I think that corner about overtaking.
You would think, and that's the reason why Horner was so surprised, frustrated with that, is the fact that most people don't try to put a tire in at that point of the corner. Yeah. And Lewis, it was a little different, I think, with Leclerc. But again, Lewis did get his elbows out there, I think, with Leclerc, and Leclerc flinched. It was what it was, and he had to kind of let off. But that's Lewis for you. He does have a little bit of luck on his side this season so far, and it's what's put him in the driver's lead. That being said, I think we all have seen that when things have been equal, and no incidents have occurred between either teams or drivers. The main storyline to me right now is the fact that they're up until Silverstone, Red Bull was, and even at Silverstone too in the sprint, I think Red Bull's car is still the best one on the course. It's still the best one out there.
Yeah. Mercedes has brought some bits in though, and it's maybe changing their car a little. That's why this next part of the season is going to be fascinating. Real quick, I'm going to run down in a little bit. We're going to go to the silly season first, but I'm going to run down my top 10 driver power rankings. I'll explain how I rank them, and you and I will debate. But we got to wrap up Hungary real quick because I don't know that the review for Seb is going to yield anything. A taping. We haven't heard anything, but he is listed right now as DQ'd. He gets 0 points out of the race in the Aston Martin. Esteban Ocon picks up the 25 points. Hamilton now moves up and picks up second place points. He's up to 18 in that race. He did not get the fastest lap because Pierre Gasly took that point away. Yes. Then Carlos Sainz moves up to third. He's now on the podium. Fernando Alonso, what a day for Alpine, 1-4. Wow. And tremendous race from Fernando. Gasly fifth. Tsunoda gets a 6th. So how about the AlphaTauris, 5th and 6th?
Yeah.
And then back-to-back Williams right after that. It's 7-8. Wow. Yeah. And then Max goes up and grabs another point and takes a 9th place finish. And Kimi Räikkönen picks up his 2nd point of the season and grabs the 10th spot. So that's the updated standings in that race. And we all know what's coming up and what's on the line. Can Red Bull get back on the pace and the front foot here when they start back up? It's going to be fascinating. But let's look at the driver market. And one thing where I want to start with this is, after the race at Hungary and that 7-8 finish for Williams, I watched the interview of George Russell. And we know that he's Mr. Saturday and he's out, qualified his teammate every time. And he's put that car into Q3. And we know that Williams car is not, even a midfield car. And he does such a great job with it. And I saw the emotion. He got so emotional when he was talking to Lawrence Barretto about that points finish. And obviously he's a name, probably the most intriguing name because of the connection to Mercedes for the driver market. Ultimately, and based on what Bottas has done this season, does he end up in a Mercedes? Do we get that announcement rather soon?
That's a good question. And again, if we're going to go with what Toto Wolff had stated, they were going to make a decision by the summer break. Congratulations, we're now here. George did do a test session for Mercedes to test out the new 18-inch Pirelli wheels for next season.
They're awesome.
What's that?
They're awesome, by the way.
Yes. They're just look at these things. They're just monsters on the track. Your elbows, like this case, it's like elbows on steroids next season when we get into that. So a lot of people are, is that an indication? I don't. Again,
Does that every year.
and it does it every year
Test for
for
them,
them
yeah.
in this case. But he does test for. I mean, and when you're having him doing the testing, it does sort of still bring things into reminder of where things are. My gut feeling is, especially in a cost capped season next year in F1, I believe Russell will end up with that second seat,
Yep.
even in a transition season. It's just I feel like you know otherwise I think Mercedes runs the risk of possibly losing him. And if they really value what he did, and especially after what he was able to do last season, where he
Sure.
basically beat, he basically in again, it wasn't Lewis's car last year in Bahrain at the Sakir Grand Prix, but at the end of the day, he did beat out Bottas head to head
Mm-hmm.
in that he was ahead of him in that race. So
Got off the line too from P2 to take the lead on the first lap.
absolutely, and again, it's a unique course setup, ridiculous levels of speed, way that was set up on the outer ring.
Yeah.
To me,
56-second lap, by the way.
yeah, I mean that was insane. We all said that we're just like we're going to see times that were just insane, and we did
Yeah.
last year. We also saw obviously everything else that happened in that race too, which was that also leads to a whole other thing. But getting back to Russell, my feeling is that yeah, I think it's been it's been said for quite some time that it seems to be like that second seat is Russell's. There's little indications I think sometimes with Valtteri at times this year where I think if he knew he had that seat locked up, maybe I don't know. To me, I think it's going to be George, and the key is going to be, and that sort of sets the tone for whatever else is going to be happening going into. And again, they're in the middle of this fight. They're in the middle of this, championship fight. Mercedes, they're back in the lead for the constructors championship. I do have to wonder, from Total Wolff's perspective, if he turns around and says, "We have made our decision. We're not ready to make it public."
Hmm.
So to say, would that be a fail-safe situation to say we've made our decision internally, but we're not yet ready to reveal? Now the problem is that you make that kind of announcement, you then every single F1 reporter is going to dig, 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 dig.
Yeah.
And does
The
it make
backhoe.
sense? And they're going to exactly. They're just going to dig, and eventually it's going to leak.
Yeah. Then you lose
Somebody is
control
going to give
of releasing the message.
precisely, and I think it makes sense depending on where they're at. And he's going to have to frame it. What I've stated before is I feel like both the future of Valtteri Bottas has to also be determined right now. He cannot be sort of in a spot where
Yeah,
he
they
doesn't
owe
know
that
where
to
he's
him.
going for next season. I think they owe it to him. The thing is how does Valtteri sort of, if he knows already kind of that he's not going to be in that seat, and how literal do you take what Toto says in terms of making sure that he has an F1 seat for next season? But if you're Valtteri and you've been in the shadow of Lewis Hamilton for most of your time, you've been an excellent teammate. Do you want to kind of sort of take a little bit of a Danny Ricciardo track and say, I want to see what I do on my own, calling my own shots here?
Yeah.
Is he able on his own to end up in a better circumstance or situation? Or does he end up kind of like Danny, where he ends up in a car, he becomes frustrated in a car that is not going to be quite as competitive? It's difficult to change that mindset.
Yeah.
But if you want to be in F1, I think he realistically knows that if he's no longer with Mercedes, he has to realize, okay, I'm no longer starting from the front of the line. I'm now probably middle of the pack or a little further back in a different car. Where, in fact, does he end up going into next season is a big thing. But I feel like both announcements need to come relatively close and concurrently with one another. That
Yeah.
Russell, if he ends up in Mercedes, that Valtteri's next seat will be known or not shortly
Post
thereafter.
haste.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of a feel Valtteri has for the situation. Toto said there's been no decision made so far, and he's also said that some of the incidents that Valtteri has been involved in. We just talked about Imola, obviously this past weekend. He's not having a great season, and some of that is self-inflicted. So you look at that and you go, well, you can say that that's not a factor, Toto, but that's just not the case. But then again, the other thing is too is, he like last week he qualified up front. I mean, he puts that car He qualifies it well. He's got tremendous racecraft, and maybe there is a little bit of risk if they don't feel George is 100% ready. Not for the qualifying aspect of it, but for the communication and setting cars up. Number one, and number two, on Sundays, can he handle, being at the front of the field? Because in the Mercedes, you're not expected to finish fifth. You're expected to be 1-2, and you're expected to have front row lockouts. The qualifying part, I bet they feel comfortable with. The one thing that they have to question is, does he have the racecraft savvy and the experience to be in a car that should lead Grand Prix, push Lewis Hamilton, play the team game, and really drive strategy for that Mercedes team to win Constructors' Championships? That's the question that they have to answer.
And also, again, Sunday race day, you have to take a look at resume.
Yep.
And to George's credit, he has pushed that car hard this year. But
he's overstepped too.
Yeah, he has. He has. He's definitely done that. I would agree. And whether or not everybody's so fixated on Russell that maybe it's Russell. Now, again, to me, it would seem that you have to make sort of if you had an idea that it isn't going to be Russell, you don't have him testing your car.
No. It's Russell or it's Valtteri. There's nobody
to me,
else.
It would come down. It would be
too much.
I think they've invested too much at this point. It's Russell, it's Valtteri. Again, Russell also very sort of, he's a fan favorite, George.
Yeah.
People love, and they
two English drivers.
The possibility of having two English drivers and in Mercedes would certainly be attractive. The dynamic of Lewis having 2 more years in the car, working to get, working as a team. They're competing against each other, but working as a team. I do wonder again in terms of the whole dynamic though changes when it's Lewis and Valtteri. Valtteri kind of, he wants to win, but Valtteri also he doesn't quite have that same sort of rock the boat potentiality there. That maybe George. I don't know if George would have that. I don't get that impression that George would be that. I think he's in a Mercedes car, especially in year one. You don't want to say you're just happy to be there, but hey, you're now, that first year might be a little bit of a honeymoon period where you see maybe a little bit of Lewis passing on some things to George in preparation. If this is, the last contract Lewis has, or, we don't have that indication yet. Lewis, he's 36, he'll be 38 when the contract's done. Could very well be signing another, if he's still performing fairly well at the front row, then he could be, he and George could be a team for over a half decade, possibly. And then as George, then it's really kind of how is George pushing Lewis and how is George progressing in that case.
If you're Lewis, you're retiring pre-40 when you're making 55. Cool.
It's up to him. Again, I would say, 55 mil. But again, you do have to get to a certain point where physically, again, he did indicate last week, we know he had a lot of physical difficulty at the end of that race in Hungary. He did indicate that COVID has had effects on him.
Yeah. And
is something that may be a bit of a part of it as well, depending on, how he builds himself up. He's predominantly, I think he's a vegan diet.
He travels with, I think her name's Angela. I forget her last name. She does everything for him, meals, every element. She is on his hip at all times.
Exactly.
She's made a huge difference for him. Yeah, he's an elite athlete and great. That's why it was stunning to see him so hobbled really after that race this weekend. But
it's a tough. But we all know Hungary is extremely. It's a 70-lap race, taxing, quote unquote Monaco without the walls.
Yeah.
Hot, changes in weather, temp, everything else. During that
race,
he
had to push the whole race.
He was pushing, starting from behind, pushing, battling. No doubt that battle with Alonso absolutely took.
Yeah.
It was 10 laps of just a battle. And
he didn't have his foot out the window and just kicking back for a Sunday drive at any.
No, this was a case where this was where Lewis was really kind of having a good old fashioned fist fight, and he was tired. He wasn't at the front end, and he had to battle through it. And it was a tough on that track where overtakes are real tough.
Yeah,
it's something they consider there. So, but to answer again, my feeling is that I think it'll be Russell. I think George will be the one that will probably end up in that seat, barring
Valtteri going to Red Bull.
Well, the indication was that I remember earlier the Helmut Marko indicated that we weren't going to have seats at Red Bull, quote unquote. It would be a fascinating dynamic, but again, that was also a quote that happened before Sergio Perez's recent run of bad luck.
Yeah.
So is that again? What I want to see is again sort of a clean. Again, Sergio qualified well at Silverstone. Then had the disaster in the sprint. And then of course you had qualified well again at Hungary.
Gets collected.
And then we saw what happened obviously at turn 1. Bad luck more than anything. I don't think
he's a race winner this year though too, but by happenstance more. He drove really well at Baku.
He did.
But based on what happened, look, he took advantage of the situation and he ends up with a race win. So I think he's going to be back. I just think that storyline would be a lot of fun.
It would be a lot of fun. But I do it again but results will be needed for Perez. He's on a 1-year deal.
Yeah, and to drive strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And they have to. If he starts knocking down results here, especially starting at Spa and going into that 3-race stretch there, and Red Bull again. The key thing is if Red Bull is a team and they see their standings points pick up, then I think you would get that done. That being said, if Red Bull really kind of wants to get things sort of locked down and they like the dynamic between Max and Sergio, then I think it behooves them to try to get the deal done during silly season, during the summer break, to try to maybe they just say, hey, right now based on things, maybe we're comfortable with doing another 1-year deal, but Sergio is going to want to have some certainty too.
Yeah.
So his team's, I'm sure, probably pushing for obviously pushing for certainty with a 2-year deal probably.
Yeah, and with all the adjustments to new cars and the new 2022 cars coming in, the Red Bull RB cars are not an easy car to drive. So you don't want to constantly be changing drivers because you finally get a guy up to speed. Now you're starting over again. You went from from Daniel Ricciardo to Gasly to Albon and now to Sergio. You need a little bit of consistency there as well. Let a guy get comfortable in the car, then drive results with it. And he's got great racecraft, does Sergio. So I expect him to be back as well. There's not going to be any changes at Ferrari, nor should there be. I think they're having a really good season, all things considered. Third in the constructors right now, tied with McLaren. McLaren, I don't think Ricciardo's going anywhere.
No, I think Ricciardo stay. I think McLaren has. They've had they had Carlos for 2 years. I don't think they were anticipating losing Carlos moving, but I understand why. I mean, Sainz literally lost his seat at Renault and then ended up at McLaren, had a pretty good 2-year run with McLaren and parlayed that to Ferrari. But Ricciardo, again, it's a case of him getting more and more comfortable with the car. I felt he was getting there. He was getting real close to that at Silverstone. And then circumstance hits with the crash at turn 1. And I still, if I'm McLaren, I think he's a very good teammate for Norris. The dynamic isn't everybody was waxing poetic about the bromance of Norris and Sainz. But at the end of the day, that was year 1. If you think that was going to necessarily stay that way between them, it's not. I mean, they have a good relationship, the two of them, but ultimately, we know what what motorsport is. Whatever your friendships are, that has to be sidetracked the minute you go to the minute that you get out on the track. So McLaren, I think, will stay the same. I don't see, but the understanding is that Norris really is the lead now. Like Sainz had been the lead, Norris had been the number 2. Norris has stepped fully forward as the number 1, and Danny now is in a different spot. Being in kind of in that second, in the second spot. But again, he is where he wanted to be. Danny was considering McLaren when he originally was a free agent a few years back. Went to Renault.
After him for a long time.
Right. And they were after him for a long time. And then the opportunity opened up and he took it. To his, and he feels pretty good there. And I don't blame him. Again, it was the Renault, despite a amazing weekend for them, the Renault Renault cars have tended to underperform in recent years, and I get the reason why Ricardo made that jump.
Yeah, and they made a change obviously in the offseason with team principal Cyril, and he's no longer there. So and rebranded the whole thing.
I think also, and I like Cyril. Don't get me wrong, but I felt like Cyril ran very. I think, and I really don't want to be overly critical of a man, but I do feel like he was very, like, sometimes a bit too emotional.
Yeah.
And the new head, I believe, is a bit more of a steady hand.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I think also Alpine understood that by going from Ricardo to Alonso, and Alonso being in older years here, was that they were kind of transitioning. It was more of a transition year for Alpine as a new brand anyway.
Fernando seat is also about car development too.
Exactly.
Communicate car development as they get into the new cars in 2022.
Precisely.
I think Cyril got let go because of the way he reacted to Daniel Ricciardo leaving.
Yeah.
I think that was kind of the last straw. I mean, he took it so personally, and you can't take it personally.
I think because of the fact that we all know they really bet in big time on Danny.
Yeah.
And for him to leave after 1 year, he did.
With Renault. Danny did 2 years with Renault.
Yes, I'm saying two. Well, it was two. Well, but second year was a lame duck. He had already gotten to a point where he had already said he was leaving the team and going to McLaren the following season. That's the problem. Is that from Cyril's perspective, you literally got into a marriage. Yeah. He got into a marriage, and then, but again, they also needed to put a good car behind him too.
Yeah.
It was as much of a proving ground for them as anything. So
yeah, I agree. What happens with Alpine after Fernando goes? Our thing, you and I have talked about, is that could be a seat ticketed for Pierre Gasly. He's in the final year of his deal at AlphaTauri. He could sign another year there, race it out. He's having a good season. He's really come into his own as a driver and matured and putting in a lot of good performances, and really knows how to communicate about the car. Does a great job. And I mean, you can just see this Alpine Renault situation with Ocon, who they already extended and got the race win this weekend, rewarding them for it. And then, Pierre Gasly, an all French two French drivers, French team based in France, Renault. That just seems so logical. I think that's the way that plays out, to be honest with you. I think
eventually, I think, and again, Gasly, I mean, he's obviously wants to push for that open seat at Red Bull. He wants it back.
Does he though?
I think he does want it back. I think he feels like what happened, losing that seat. Wrong? I think so. Yeah, I do. I think he wants to prove. I
wouldn't if I'm him.
Why not?
Never feel comfortable because they didn't stand by me early.
But if you feel like it was a case where, I mean, I hear you on that. But again, if let's say Red Bull comes calling, if I'm Gasly, I'm not. You have a chance to be once again close to the front of the line, and you have you have a maturity about you that you didn't have, back in the beginning of 2019. You have a race
winner. Teammate again, though. That's tough.
That's
hard on another driver because
it is
so good.
He is, but everybody's got it. But anybody who is in that second seat has to deal with the fact that of the the solar power, burning power of a Max Verstappen. You just have to you go in and understand
like that. Drivers don't.
And they won't. That's the reason why I'm telling you. Gasly still, I think, wants that seat until that seat is. They make the announcement on it. Gasly's going to want that seat.
Yeah,
he's going to want that seat.
Yeah,
because he knows,
and claim what he thinks this is.
That's what I'm saying. He'll go and say it was his bit. That it started with Monza last year.
Yeah,
and his pace is better.
Just do?
Exactly, and the chance to potentially get in there and basically say, you know what, I earned myself back in.
Yeah,
there is something to be said for that. That being said, you also have. Alex Albon is still out there right now.
Yeah,
he struggled. He also had a good. We all saw a really good second part of 2019, but 2020 whatever mojo he had going, he had lost in that circumstance. And Albon is someone you do have to kind of still keep in the background. I could see Albon possibly if they decide to bring him, if he comes back into to F1, if Gasly let's say Gasly ends up at Red Bull.
He goes AlphaTauri.
I would think, Albon would probably end up back at AlphaTauri, possibly pairing up with Tsunoda. What happens to, and the other dynamic I look at is, what happens with Sergio?
Yeah.
Could Sergio go to? Could Sergio? They decide to go with a veteran, have Sergio at Alpha as sort of the lead guy and help bring Sonoda along.
That would all depend on what his other options were.
Precisely.
Sergio's.
And but
Sonoda's got to have a good second half of this season. He's teetering right now.
he is. But I thought he had he responded in him fairly well at Hungary. And I think we have to understand that it is a rookie season and that started off strong, then struggled.
Yeah.
You deal with that with your rookies. And again, at the end of the day, Alpha is seen as a development for Red Bull. They are who they are. They can call them a sister team or not. They are the second team. They are Red Bull's second team.
They're just on the outside of that midfield too. Best of the rest. Like they're close to being there. If they didn't have a rookie driver in Tsunoda with some consistency, they could be fourth right now in the constructors.
They could, but I often wonder how much Red Bull, the main team, wants that.
Yeah.
I think they want they can refer to them quote unquote as a sister team. But they never. But if they, as long as they own them, as long as they own that, have ownership of that team, the main brand is going to be the one that you're going to be looking at there. It's always going to be that way, and that's always going to be the dynamic. If they were going to make AlphaTauri into a true competitive midfield team, to me, we keep talking about driver swaps, but Gasly for Perez. Perez, I think, would make AlphaTauri a much more competitive unit.
Yep.
Would that be something that happens going into next season if Sergio wants to stay in, and I think obviously he does, but if he doesn't have that Red Bull seat, would he be willing to take the Alpha seat? He wants to win again. Sergio is at the point of his life where he wants to. He says, as all racers are going to say, I'm at the point I want to win championships. Well, he's got a chance to win a constructors championship, but he also wants the chance to win a drivers championship too. Which
whoever signs that deal with AlphaTauri has to put in their contract that they can't take away the white rims. They look so good.
Oh, that car's I love the design. Like the Toro Rosso thoroughly looked like the B team.
Yeah.
Whereas Alpha's look is so thoroughly theirs that I love. I kind of miss a little more of the white that they had on that car last year, because now that they have the dark blue on the front of it much more prominently, it sometimes gets a little bit more tough to identify it, much like when obviously Racing Point changed to Aston, and you could always find that pink you could always find that pink car
pink flying around, the BWT pink car.
Exactly, and it was so identifiable. Or Renault with yellow and black, like this year, and we're getting into a livery conversation here, but it is a little tougher to sometimes identify the cars depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, let's go to Aston because even though Seb got DQ'd, he finished second. Well, it's just in the race he finished second for whatever reason with the fuel and not being able to withdraw enough fuel from the car. But he's driven really well. And Aston Martin, it's really an interesting situation there. Seb has been good for that team, and I think again bringing him on with Omar. With Otmar is about development of the next car as well. And we know Stroll, who's a better driver than some people think, even, they just want to call him nepotism because his father now owns the team, and he came with a lot of money and sponsorships. But the fact of the matter is I don't see any changes at Aston Martin right now. I think they got a good thing going. They got to rebuild, for their 2022 and kind of go back up to really competing for that midfield the way they should be doing.
Yeah,
and consistency.
Exactly. And again, Vettel has been getting results. He's also had some struggles too. We saw at Silverstone that they had to retire the car, which is his first retirement, I think, in a couple seasons.
I think they did that just so that he could avoid a penalty.
Yeah,
to change some parts on that car.
Exactly, and that's why they ultimately retired the car there. So, Aston, to me, again, they had been pushing. They had been as high up, at times. It was that end of last season, even though Mercedes had walked away with the championship. It was that fascinating 3-team battle there heading into the final race in Abu Dhabi. And yeah, it's a different spot for them now, Aston. Again, Stroll's obviously not, he had some good performances. He did get on a podium at Monza last year. Stroll has had podiums as well. Lance has I think there's a lot of people look at him. There's one, again, we all know there's two camps with Lance. Some of them see him as a young up and coming driver still. who's now like kind of a young veteran driver who has had some results, has been up in the upper echelon. And we've heard some sort of outlandish driver market rumors. As we all know, we had that quote from former F1 champion Jacques Villeneuve about the idea of a driver swap between Mercedes and Aston, which in a cost cap world, I don't see that happening. But you could make an argument for that. But I agree with you. I think Aston's in a spot here where, they're developing themselves for the next 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And that I think that team will remain the same going into the final season. Unless, again, a rough second half of the season and Seb says, guys, enough's enough. I think I'm good. But he's on a multi-year deal.
Pick up trash after the races. I'm not going to race.
Right. And I don't see that. There was a definite change in his demeanor this season, Seb. He's a seasoned veteran now. I mean, he's seasoned, obviously many, many years, so much success. What a resume. But Seb's in a comfortable enough spot here where he can pretty much, with Aston, I think there's a good, as you said, there's a good dynamic there with the team. I think it's also lessons that Lance hopefully is picking up from him as well, as he gets into the, what will be the prime of his career too. So that dynamic, I think Seb will be there will stay there. And I think Lance will be there too.
Yeah. We talked about Williams, and that's going to be the trickle-down effect of Mercedes with George Russell. Latifi's going to stay. Real nice race from Nicholas Latifi. He's doing well in that Williams as well. And it'll be interesting to see Williams if they can move back up the field a little bit with the cost cap and the new car. Alfa Romeo, I don't see either driver returning. I think Kimi's at the end of the line, and I think Antonio Giovinazzi just hasn't shown enough with that car. Not that the car's been great, but I think that you're going to see 2 new drivers in that Alfa Romeo.
I do too.
One of them could be Bottas.
One of them could be Bottas. There were reports that Bottas's representation had met with Alfa. I think in preparation for the possibility of a change. I think in my mind, Alfa is the most likely landing spot for Valtteri if he loses the Mercedes seat for next season. I think it makes perfect. I think it locks in, makes perfect sense, especially with Alfa, recommitting to staying in Formula One with Sauber for 5 more seasons. I don't think if Alfa had the idea that maybe it's not worth continuing that, they want to have at least one name driver, a veteran name driver who has had success. Kimi made perfect sense when he left from Ferrari, but again, the result, he's getting up there in driver years here. And I think, despite the likely point that he's earned in the standings, his race pace has not been great. It just hasn't been. And to me, I think it's Valtteri. And I think the second, what's that? It could be, again, we know that Fred Vasseur likes Nico Hulkenberg. Depends on if they want to go 2 veterans. There's also, again, what the cost negotiation might be. We could see Hulk back in. But I also think an F2 option is possible as well. If one of the Ferrari drivers like Robert Schwartzman or Callum Millett is in that mix there, I think if either of them are fairly successful, they could potentially end up in one of those seats as well. And there's been some others who have tested as well with Alpha. But again, you got the full Ferrari Academy at F2. And again, Nico's, you have to account for the fact that you may have to have 2, or you're going to be looking at 2 drivers that you're going to have to transition over into a Ferrari engine. If you bring in Bottas, he's going from being Mercedes his whole career
Williams
to a Ferrari. Yeah. And then are you going to bring in Hulkenberg, who has been mostly Renault, has obviously driven Mercedes as a replacement driver. If you're bringing him in, then that's 2 drivers that you're having to transition into your brand new engine. And maybe that's the path you do take. I just feel like Alpha definitely, if you have the academy, if one of those academy drivers is really showing out well, it's going to be tough for me to say that I would have that second seat wouldn't be probably one of those F2 options.
Yeah. I don't see any changes at Haas.
I had
tied in.
he started. Yeah, Shu was a consideration because I think the contract still hasn't been, but it was a multi-year agreement.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of that was also, I think a lot of people were going with the seat situation, with that the seat, the seat wasn't, proportion to Mick. I think a lot of people sort of took that as like, oh, he's going to get out of Haas. I mean, listen, I think he probably still gets another year of experience there. The dynamic of him and Nikita has been an interesting one. Of late, they haven't crossed swords, so to speak. But I know that dynamic has been a very super competitive one between the two, between Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. Shu would have been someone I would have considered if things were still not done, or at least not. And I'm curious. Shu I could have easily seen in that second seat at Alpha, if there was any doubt of a change there. But it doesn't sound like it. It sounds to me like he would probably be with Haas for another year. But he was, again, Shu was in the Alpha, has tested for Alfa Romeo. Again, and if they decide that, if there's a way to figure that out to get him in a seat, a Bottas Schumacher pairing would be one that would be, I think, very fascinating for Alpha, and one that they can sell.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the last name.
Precisely.
Tremendous. Going from being a teammate of a 7-time champion to being the teammate of the son of a 7-time champion. That would be an interesting storyline.
Would be.
All right, and let's get to real quick. Let's get to this power rankings.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down my power rankings of drivers based on this season, where we are right now through 11 races. The things that I took out of the equation, it's not just about where they are in the driver's standings.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about, that's part of it, how they've obviously done in the races, because it is a race and you're trying to win. But it's also about what they're getting out of their particular piece of machinery, mm-hmm. and their piece of machinery in conjunction with what their teammates getting.
Right.
That's a big factor for me, what they're getting out of the car,
mm-hmm.
Their racecraft, their abilities, and where they sit in this field of drivers, because it's a fascinating field of drivers and so many great young drivers, guys taking the next step, several guys that are very quick on this grid in Formula One. Here are the drivers that did not make the top 10.
Okay.
Mazepin, and these actually are in order from 20 to 11. Mazepin,
Okay.
Raikkonen, Giovinazzi, Schumacher, Tsunoda, Latifi, Ocon, Stroll, Ricciardo, and Bottas. I don't have Bottas in the top 10 based on what I've seen so far this season. Interesting.
Yeah, again, the pattern, the pattern hasn't been great for Bottas. He would be the one I might quibble with because of his qualify. But again, if you're looking at the entirety of the first 11 races of the season,
mm-hmm.
he's not at his standard of where he has been. But
and I have to consider that.
That's
car.
the one where exactly I have to consider that car. He's not getting everything he should be able to get out of that car.
Absolutely. So let's go down from 10 to 1. At number 10, mm-hmm. I have Sebastian Vettel. He's got, now one podium, but he finished 2 races second, both where some crazy circumstance happened. But Seb, number 10 right now, I think he's driving pretty well. And considering he's in a new car after leaving Ferrari in all those years and how miserable it was at the end of Ferrari for him, I think he's done a pretty good job there. And you tipped on it earlier. I just think that he's reinvigorated. You see it in his
mm-hmm.
in his body language, and I love the fact that he was cleaning up at Silverstone after the race. I love Seb, and I got him in the top 10, so he's number 10. Number 9, I have Sergio Perez. Now, the reason why he's that low, and I love Sergio.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he's that low is that he's just not getting nearly the same out of that car as his teammate is. With Max Verstappen, and this is really hard for any, teammate of Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
And Max has been in the car, obviously, for a long time, knows every element of that car. I mean, he got, out of the RB16B, he gets everything out of that and more. Yeah. And Sergio's just not there yet. So that's why I got him at number 9.
I think I might have put him a little bit higher than 9. I have to see probably
mm-hmm.
the rest of your list in this circumstance. I look at what he has done. He has consistently qualified pretty highly in that car. And I think there has been some circumstances that have hurt him of late. But it is a tough seat. It's somebody referred to as the poison chalice of the second Red Bull
Yeah.
ever since Danny Ricciardo left. I mean, the plan was, it's very obvious to me, and it's always has been obvious to me that Ricciardo leaving really kind of changed the dynamic, I think, overall for them. So, they were not as competitive as I think they would have liked, and that to me is probably the biggest thing there when I look at that. I probably would have him maybe. I think for me, I probably would have Sergio based just because of results and everything. I probably might have squeezed him up closer to 7 or 8.
Okay.
But I understand your logic behind that.
Yeah. Number 8, speaking of which, is Carlos Sainz, another guy that jumped from the McLaren into a new car, into a Ferrari. And I just think he's a really good driver. I don't think he's fully comfortable in that car yet, and I don't think that car is at the same level as the top of the best of the rest. But I think he's been really consistent. He's had a little bit of bad luck. He's made some mistakes. But that being said, I got him at number 8 right now.
I can definitely go with that. I might have him closer to 7th for me. He and Pierre, maybe I would probably flip flop a little bit, maybe in that spot. Maybe I would. I could see that. What I would say here with regards to Carlos is the key thing for him is, as much as George Russell has been sort of Mr. Saturday when it comes to qualies, that's the key for Carlos. I think if he starts higher up on the grid, he's a classic case of, I think he can battle through the midfield and really compete, but he has a tough time getting the podiums because his quality form, I think, in a lot of cases could be a lot better.
Yeah.
And again, but as you said, he is still getting a handle on that Ferrari. And the fact that he's still being able to finish as high as he is. I look at Carlos as a very well-balanced driver.
Yeah.
He just isn't quite at elite level. If he's able to start, if Ferrari really can, going into next year with the new car, really kind of maximize that vehicle, they have a chance of really Ferrari being back in it again. In the, not just sort of being happenstance top 3, but consistent top 3. But again, I believe Carlos's performances are key, but the qualities have to be better in order for him to be able to challenge to be up higher.
Well, one guy who has qualified well is Pierre Gasly, and he is number 7. Considering this is the sister car of the Red Bull team, and the resources are not allocated, across the board in the same way, he just gets so much out of that car. So he's just matured so much as a driver. Patience. He had a little bit of bad luck in Austria, and kind of got clipped out, but. Overall, Gasly, I think, has been really good, really consistent, and I got him at number 7 right now.
I just
think he's matured so much as a driver.
I think that's completely fair, and again, considering what the conversation we just had with regards to Perez versus Gasly for the number 2 seat for next year, the fact that you have him ranked higher than Sergio. So to me, it becomes if we're looking at performance in this case, it's earned, and I think it's another reason why Gasly, I think, is definitely in the conversation with regards to that second seat for Red Bull for next year.
Next on my list, number 6, let's go to Fernando Alonso. Now, it's widely known to people that listen to this podcast that we love Fernando, and that battle last week in Hungary with Lewis Hamilton was as good as it gets. Just go back and watch just that portion of the race again, right? It was so good. We know he's a legend, and he has been, 2-time Formula One world champion. He had a DNF in the first race at Bahrain. He's in a new car, in a team that's trying to, take the next step after Daniel Ricciardo leaves. And he's finished in the points on several occasions this year, including at Azerbaijan, finished 6th, finished 8th in France, got points at the Styrian Grand Prix, got points in Austria, got points at Great Britain, and now has gotten points at Hungary. He's having a really good year. He's 11th in the driver standings, but when I got to consider racecraft and savviness of a driver and everything, I just can't drop him lower than that. He's 40, but he doesn't drive like a 40-year-old.
Yeah, he had a. I mean, the hung as we said on episode 9, it was a battle that stirred the blood. I think everybody just watched that 10 laps, those 10 laps of him and Hamilton, and starting getting flashbacks from Imola 2005 between him and Schumacher, him and
Yeah.
Michael Schumacher. It literally had almost the whispers of that in a different circumstance, but yeah, he's the matador. He is. He hate to break out the Spanish cliches, but it's the truth. I think sixth is, considering what he's gotten out of that car, is pretty remarkable. And yeah, for all the points that you stated, I am completely on board with having him at number 6.
Yeah, I mean, what he did to Schumacher at Suzuka and that pass around the outside
Yep.
was absolute. I mean, you don't pass there, but he's got just
His style,
stones.
but he's got that. He has the exactly huevos to do it.
Yeah, it's just awesome what happened there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I got him at 6. All right, top
Okay.
5.
All right.
I have not mentioned the Williams driver that we've talked a lot about on
Mm-mm.
this episode. That would be George Russell. The car is inferior, but he keeps pushing the limits of that car beyond what it is capable of. Hasn't got the results per se. Finally got his first points finish in 3 years with
Mm-hmm.
Williams. But right now, based on everything, I'm going to put him in the top 5, rounding out the top 5 in my power rankings.
For squeezing everything out, and then what he's been able to do to get to Q3 in that car. It's just a weird dynamic in the fact that he had been qualifying going into Q2, Q3 on a consistent basis, and the one race that he just completely flamed out in quali is the one he finally gets points at last
Yeah,
week, because he started 17th, and then he started the race P17, and then was able to jump the ladder after everything that happened. And at one point could have been P2, but then he had to come back a bit. Yeah, George has done he squeezed every ounce of and more out of that Williams this year.
yeah, no doubt.
And it's tough to it's one of the reasons why there is so much pressure, I think, on Mercedes right now to get him into that seat for next year, because you can see he's pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing consistently in that car. That yeah, for what he was able to do and the fact he was able to squeeze out the points. I don't know. Listen, there are also people who there are detractors of George Russell but at the same time, I just go, can you see anybody squeezing the performance out of that Williams the way he's been able to do it? And it's tough for me to think of anybody else who would be able to do that the way he's been able to do that on a consistent basis. He has a resume, former F2 champion, and everything else that goes with that. I'm on board with that.
Yeah. My next driver, number 4, is Charles Leclerc. He has a couple poles this year.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of bad luck points wise, based on what happened at Monaco, where if he ends up starting that race, he wins that race probably, because that's Monaco.
Yeah.
He does only have the one podium finish at the British Grand Prix, and really was in the right spot. When the collision happens at Copse between Hamilton and Verstappen, he
Mm-hmm.
takes the lead. He leads most of that race before he gets chased down by Lewis Hamilton. But he is so quick, and I think he's getting everything and more out of that Ferrari. And a little bit of bad luck here in the first 11 races this season. But
Mm-hmm.
when I consider that, I got to take the bad luck out of the equation to an extent. I got Leclerc sitting at number 4.
I think it's fair. The way I look at it with Charles is, there's times when he had a tremendous pace, I think, at Silverstone. It was really fun to watch, and that Ferrari out the
I think
front.
they were stunned at it.
I think everybody they were stunned. I think everybody was stunned, considering the fact he had he had the computer issues while that was going on. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we're having a supersonic jet, and you're having malfunctions trying to figure it out with somebody else hot on your tail. But one thing about Charles that I do want to hopefully see more out of him as we go forward, beyond just the bad luck, is that sometimes I feel like when I'd like for him to sometimes maybe be even more aggressive, especially when he gets into wheel to wheel. I feel like at times that I don't know if it's sometimes a little lack of confidence with the car. That if he gets into a bit of a pitched battle, like for example at Copse, when Lewis comes at him and takes the lead, and Charles had to back off a little bit, and Lewis didn't. there's sometimes I feel like there's that other level there where he's not a bruising driver like a Verstappen is. So I feel like if Max gets to that top end and he is already there, it's the one thing that kind of keeps Charles in sort of a tier slightly below that. But in terms of pure pace, Charles is as good as anybody, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Number 3, I have Lewis Hamilton, the driver's standings leader right now.
Mm-hmm.
I have it 3. Let me just give you the top 3 so we can debate all 3, because you may have these in a different order. I have Hamilton at 3, Lando Norris, who up until last week's race had 15 straight races in the points, a McLaren record. And when you consider the history of McLaren, that's pretty impressive. And Max Verstappen at number 1. So what do you think of that top 3? Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton.
Based off of if we're talking purely off performance this season, and consistent performance this season, Norris. I absolutely have Norris ahead of Hamilton because again, in 2 circumstances, Hamilton was able to take advantage of bad situations and be able to get recent major results out of it. Again, there's a little bit of a whiff of luck with Lewis, but that comes with driver. That comes with racing at this level. The key thing I look at with Norris for me is he has been consistently in the points, constantly challenging. He's always a racer that's in there. And Lewis himself, when we saw it in Austria, saying, complimenting Norris on how good he is getting, and how that really gives McLaren hope here in the future, going forward, to continuously be in that upper echelon, and potentially maybe in a few years as Norris continues to develop, competing for not just a drivers' championship, but also maybe they get in it for constructors' championship. Maybe.
Yep.
So I'm in complete agreement there in terms of that. And let's face it, Norris also, even at Hungary, quality was not as good as he would like it. Had an amazing jump at the beginning of that race. Had a chance, I think, potentially to if it's on a dry surface, that maybe maybe it is him and Max challenging each other. When that before and after that crash occurs, maybe the two of them are battling each other there at Hungary in that circumstance. So yeah, I'm completely on board with Norris being 2, based off of his results and everything this year. He's been the most I think he's been, other than Max, and even in Max has been up and down with things that have happened. Lando's been continuously consistent on the grid all year, so I'm in agreement certainly with that form. And again, we talk about with Max. To me, again, he gets, as you stated earlier, he squeezes the absolute maximum amount of capability out of the RB. He just does.
Yeah.
It's tough to, and the things that have happened to him this year have been circumstance. Blown tire at Baku. He had that race, as we like to say, in a rocking chair at Baku. He's walking away with that race, and had dominant performances right up through Silverstone. And then it's just, cops happens. And then the car, he's still wondering where he's at physically coming back after, even with the 2-week break. Things weren't quite aligned right, I think, at the Hungaroring. And now that he's got a few, and I know he probably wants to get back in the car and kind of get back into it as soon as possible. Kind of like you, Jace, wanting, the racing to be back as soon as possible. I'm sure he's itching at the bit and doesn't necessarily want to be sitting in a simulator trying to
7-day sim,
doing 24-hour sim like he supposedly was doing to get himself ready.
He said he drove 8 hours of the 24 too. That's insane.
That's just
that's nuts.
That's Max. I mean, he's literally just wired. He obviously, when he was born, he was wired with a gear shifter.
Yep. Yep, he had a paddle shifter right out of the womb.
Exactly. So, and that's what makes him sort of, to me, again, if it's an even fight between the top 3 right now, and things are straight on and there are no interesting incidents that occur, Max is to me the driver of the first 11 races of the season without question.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think he's just been phenomenal, and it just makes the whole rest of this season so intriguing.
But how he handles this break and coming back out of this break is as much the story of the season as anything. You had a 32-point lead. It's evaporated. You're trailing now. Red Bull is trailing. How are they going to deal with the pressure as a team? How is he going to deal with the pressure now of having that lead? Still as a relatively young driver, but with years of experience that most people don't have at this point. This is the first time he's also been in a true championship fight. This is really the first time for him where he legitimately has a shot at winning the drivers' championship. Does his laser does he get too tight? Does he get too not stressed out, but just like tries to do maybe too much? And that's where a veteran like Lewis is able to keep him at bay.
Yeah. That's the thing. You know, there's a different mentality when you go into Yas Marina at the end of last season to win a race. And, you know, you're not competing for a championship. It's a different mentality, race in, race out. You have to play the long game because you can't put your car in peril. It's not about winning the race or bust. It's now about, doing everything you can to win the race, but also cognizant of the fact that I can't DNF. I can't crash out here. So that's different. I mean, and we've seen them come together, him and Lewis at Imola, in week 2 of this season. So it's a different mentality. And
but I will say this too, Jace, that also you don't want to lose the edge either. What makes Max Verstappen who he is as a racer is he's not going to back down. He's never shown in his career that he's going to do that. He'd rather say, F it, go for it, and send it every possibility that he has it versus not. And that's really, that's the mentality that he has to continue to hold. It's just, does he have to pick his punches a little bit more? Sure. But I think he's already way better than he was, a few years back in that regard.
Well, it's going to be interesting, you know why? Because when they come back from this break, I think that both drivers are going to want to make it really clear, okay, we've had a break, but I'm not giving in when we come back. Don't expect that. And both drivers are incredibly bullheaded and competitive, fighting for a championship. Lewis to go into the record books with 8. Max to get his first in a car that's probably maybe a little bit better. And both drivers are going to want to make a statement at Spa, which is an interesting first corner to begin with, right? To go down to that first turn there.
You go to Eau Rouge and then Radillon. And then, again, there's already been enough conversations. It's another storyline again after the recent crash that happened at Spa. Radillon, again, the problem is the spacing at Radillon, again, where if a car loses it, hits the wall, and rebounds right back in, and everybody's going at the speed that they're going. I'm going to be curious to see in the next year or so if they decide to make any changes a little bit with Radillon. I think there was some talk about having more gravel at that spot. But obviously, as far as Massey, I think, is concerned, he says Spa is in good enough condition is in the right condition to be able to race it. So, you come back. It's the longest it's in terms of length, the biggest course that you can possibly be on in Formula One in terms of its overall length.
Powerful DRS zone, too.
Oh my goodness, yeah! You get there again, Eau Rouge to the Kemmel, to Radillon to the Kemmel Straight.
Yeah, that Kemmel Straight DRS zone. That's where the Red Bull will have the advantage on that straight.
I think so too. I agree with you. I think it's going to be where that's one of the reasons why I feel like Max comes back. I think Belgian Grand Prix is perfect. Is a perfect spot really for Red Bull to regain their mojo.
Yeah, going to be a lot of orange there. Going to be a lot of orange at Zandvoort as well. Last thing, our driver standings are you versus myself. We went into the race weekend with me leading 20-14. Here was how I picked the finish to be Max, Lando Norris, and Valtteri Bottas. I struck out because the guy I had third knocked out the first 2 guys essentially, and from having a podium finish. You had in the race Max winning, Lewis number 2, Daniel Ricciardo 3, who also caught some shrapnel in that first corner incident and damaged his car. He ended up finishing 11th in the race, even after the DQ for Sebastian Vettel. But because Vettel DQ'd, Lewis Hamilton now finishes second. So you not only get Lewis on the podium, but you get the exact position where you picked him. So You
So
pick up the 4 points.
should we make? I'm curious though. Should we make this provisional because of the fact that
Oh, yeah.
we haven't gotten yet the result
Yep.
from the Vettel DQ, and if they win it, then Lewis drops down a point, and then that changes our standings as well.
Then
So
you'll
we'll
go
say
to 15 points instead of 18.
It's 15 instead of 18. So love you, Seb, love you, but I got a battle here with Jason, and I intend to win this thing.
I don't think he has a leg to stand on, by the way, with this appeal.
I don't think so either. I think
really
they're trying, but I think it's just gonna be tough.
Yeah, it's cut and dry. You got to be able to pull out 1.0 liters, and they could only pull out 0.3. So, the FIA doesn't quibble over math.
I mean, that's a lot, that's pretty low. That is really, really just when I saw 0 point, I was just like, yeah, good luck. You have to do it, but.
All right, that's going to put a wrap on episode 10 of the Stick to F1 podcast. A lot of meat there for you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Leave us a rating and review if you can. That'll help other fans of motorsport and Formula One find this podcast. If anything big happens, we'll bring you another episode. Otherwise, we're counting down the days to the Belgian Grand Prix and Spa when the season resumes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time on the Stick to F1 podcast.